In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head. Just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
Can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to It's Not Just in Your Head. This is Max Golding, therapist, humanoid, and we have, who is the other person here?
It's Harriet Fraud. Welcome to It's Not Just in Your Head. Today we're going to talk about Britney Spears, who is a national preoccupation for good reasons, we think. And those good reasons we will explain. Because Britney Spears is such a big case that it's in the newspaper every day. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, just today announced that they will take her case because it's a civil liberties case. And it's relevant to It's Not Just in Your Head because it's an example of how the capitalism can function to make someone enslaved while extorting money. Because conservatorship is supposed to happen when a person is completely unable to manage his, her, or their affairs. And in Britney Spears' case, that was temporarily true 13 years ago. And then two corrupt judges waived her rights to reconsider conservatorship. And the court-appointed advocate for her, who was supposed to be advising her of her rights, was paid $520,000 a year by her father, who was ostensibly her conservator and really was her enslaver, and made $3 million off her father. And he never bothered telling her, even though he knew that she wanted to leave this oppressive and dictatorial conservatorship. He never told her of her rights. The conservatorship was extended those 13 years, ostensibly on the premise that Britney Spears was senile. In spite of the fact that her father forcibly medicated her, she wasn't senile. She wasn't so senile that she couldn't be performing and memorizing countless lyrics and dance moves. Meanwhile, her father, who forced her to work, whether she was sick or well or too tired or whatever, who forced on her an IUD, an intrauterine device she didn't want because she wanted another child and he controlled her reproduction, and who appropriated her money. He gave her only $2,000 a week in money while he amassed hundreds of millions. This is an example of what Jamie Spears amassed to himself while enslaving his daughter. She released 4 albums in 4 years and then did a global tour, netting $131 million. She promoted the X Factor and she was paid $50 million for that. She did 4 years during her conservatorship in a hit Las Vegas residency, for which Britney Spears' father amassed her pay, which was $300 million. In the last of too many more examples, I will just tell you that Jamie Spears, the conservator, made $15 million from Estee Lauder for commercials. By the way, her estate, now that she is trying to reclaim it and may well succeed, is only worth $60 million. And there's no accounting for most of the millions spent, although millions were spent guarding her, paying people lavishly to guard her, to keep her from ever having a cell phone, to keep her from ever being close to anyone else, to watch her while she was at the gym, to watch her while she showered, to make sure she didn't make any phone calls that were not monitored. She was enslaved. Meanwhile, her father intervened anytime she got attached to anyone, even If a makeup artist was friendly and kind to her, that makeup artist was fired, and he had the right under this slave-like conservatorship. And conservators do have these rights to enslave those people who are conservatees, excuse me. He used his money to control her. It was her money, but he appropriated. Twice she rebelled, and he called a 1550, which is where you call into the police that someone's going crazy, and they send a helicopter overhead, police squad cars, and psychiatrists to drug her and strap her to a gurney. The last time he did that, which was the second time he did it because she was only allowed supervised visits with her children. She loved her children, and she was holding the baby, and she didn't want to give it up. By the way, no one ever found her an unfit mother. She was a loving mother, which was acknowledged by all. And we should say parenthetically, no father has been ever deemed an unfit father. That's just not in the legal lexicon. At any rate, Britney Spears was also controlled through medication. She was forced to take powerful medications that made her numb. I think that the reason that this is so captivating for Americans is that Britney Spears represents phenomena from sexism to peddling sexuality to over-medication to sexist control to capitalist control and the collusion of the system in it. Because just as Britney started, her parents started making money off her when she was 13. Her first big hit single was Baby Hit Me One More Time. And that was a total hit. She performed it with her coy, sugary little girl voice, wearing a parochial school skirt, but very short, and a bare midriff. She looked like the kind of kid pedophiles would love, someone who's trained and tracked and groomed to be sexual for older men while she has no idea what's going on and is very coy and childlike and sugary and making money for her pimp. So that's part of the corruption, that kind of sexuality where this girl is supposed to be enticing men when she hasn't experienced any kind of sex or any sexual desire by herself, for herself as a sexually empowered woman. In addition, it captivates what's happening to America in terms of medication. Britney Spears was medicated against her will. 1 in 4 American women is on psych meds that might help them and might not. It certainly does make them more numb and controllable. 6% of children in the United States are drugged so that they can sit in school and be obedient and passive, rather than be the active children they ought to be in an active and stimulating kind of curriculum. In addition, we are the only country now, the only Western advanced nation, first world, that allows medications to be advertised in public media, urging people to numb themselves with psych drugs or take other drugs which may have terrible side effects. In addition, Britney shows a kind of male supremacy that let these male judges twice waive her right to be able to know what was happening and to change her conservatorship. She was a conservatee. Conservatees are allowed by law a certain period where they can revoke the conservatorship if they feel it's abusive. But this very sexist judge, who was no doubt in league with her father, didn't even allow her those rights. The legal advocate that she had, appointed by the court, Sam Ingham, was supposed to advocate for her legally. Instead, he didn't tell her she had a right to appeal her conservatorship. He was paid, by the way, by Britney's father. He amassed $3 million over his legal advocacy over Britney and $520,000 a year. Once it came out what was going on, he quit. You can see why. Her father controlled in capitalist fashion all the people who worked for her and paid them lavishly out of her earnings. And I think this hit home because America is watching the billionaires accrue another $660 billion during this pandemic, in which one out of 60% of Americans had at least some experience of unemployment, which hurt them financially. They see Jeffrey Bezos spending $500 million going to the moon without being taxed. He didn't pay taxes. His secretary did. Those warehouse workers did, but he didn't. He gave those workers $15.50 an hour and forced them to be crammed into warehouses while they packed and got packages and items ready for shipping in such close quarters that 20,000 of them got COVID over the time of the COVID epidemic. He had the rule that they could only get 10 days sick leave, even if they got COVID at the warehouse. And he was generous enough, in quotes, generous, to allow other workers to give up their sick days for those workers, but not to extend the sick days and the coverage for those warehouse workers that were sickened in his warehouses. Americans know they're being ripped off. Those essential, in quotes, workers who get a ticker tape parade in cities like New York, and I should mention that all but one union backed out of the ticker tape parade because they said, we don't want a parade. We want to be paid. That's what we want. And that included the delivery people who deliver the dinners and the groceries because people don't want to get out and get COVID, who often make less than minimum wage and who are now joining the deliveristas union in the United States because they've been terribly cheated during the pandemic. All the essential workers, those at the grocery store, those delivering, those packing the shelves, are still getting minimum wage or lower wages. And Americans are aware that you can call someone essential, and they are essential, and not pay them more than the minimum. And so that they identify with a huge ripoff that Britney Spears' father, Jamie Spears, managed by bribing everyone around her, because these rich men like Bezos bribe their senators and congressmen and hire their corporate lawyers and tax lawyers to get out of any taxes, like Donald Trump did. You know, even the guy from Berkshire, Warren Buffett, who's supposed to be the sweet billionaire, he paid less taxes than his secretary last year. People know they're being ripped off, and so they see Britney, a star, being ripped off, being denied her rights, being misinformed about what rights she has, being surrounded by controllers, having her reproductive organs controlled, as in the anti-abortion and anti-birth control movements, so that she can't have a baby in this case that she wants to, because her father won't okay removing the IUD. Britney Spears is the kind of prisoner that most Americans identify: someone exploited, someone over-medicated, someone who's getting inadequate medical attention, someone whose rights are disbanded by a very expensive team. And also what Britney Spears teaches us all, and I should say as an aside, I was never a great fan of that sugary, coy, oversexed singing that she did. However, she has taught America, you go public, you get the word out about how you're being exploited, and you can stop it. You can start a movement, and the Free Britney Spears is a movement, and you can get free. Because once Britney Spears' enslavement became really public, her manager quit. Her legal advocate quit. Everyone knew what was happening. She was informed of her legal rights. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, interfered and said, no, she deserves legal rights, not enslavement. And the whole business was exposed and enraged people. And I think that's why Britney Spears has captured captured America's attention. It's people like me who really are not fans of Britney Spears singing are captured by the story of her super exploitation, the exploitation of her sexuality, the exploitation of her earnings, and her enslavement by her handlers, which is legally passed off. And now it can't be, because now there is a mass movement, which is something that we all have to learn, that she's regained her mental health. She's saying, I'm strong, I don't have to allow this. She's stopped taking the medication. She's going to get her children back, who she really wants. And she's going to take a vacation from her career, which she badly needs and wants. She's going to escape exploitation as a sex object in a male supremacist culture. And she's going to escape the legal constraints that kept her ignorant and imprisoned, because she went public, and the public is incensed about it. And I think that's why she is totally an icon for a mass of Americans who wouldn't have necessarily been her fans before. What do you think, Max?
I think that growing up with Britney Spears on the radio for when the 90s or something, early 2000s, when I was like a teenager, for me, it was, I was basically a kid. And so I don't think the conservatorship stuff was going on yet necessarily. But to me, the media spectacle of it, because this is on one level that you didn't mention necessarily, well, you mentioned a little bit, but the spectacle of it, where people just see like a pop star, and it starts out as a child pop star. You just see this, you just see entertainment. And of course, her style was always kind of sexualized, and also in a kind of creepy way, because she was so young, and the music, just like everything else, it's all targeted toward kids anyway. So there's all kinds of other layers there. But it's almost funny being twice the age I was then as a teenager or older, and seeing that from day one, she was basically just being exploited by her parents as a source of wealth extraction. As you just laid out really eloquently, and that I don't think, like, to this day, most people who are consuming pop culture in this, whoever the Britney Spears people are today, maybe there's more sort of independent women without conservationships or something in popular culture. I'm sure there are, but it's just something that we don't see because it's so behind the scenes. And this is such an interesting situation where everything became public. And I didn't even know about this until you emailed me about it, because I don't know, it just didn't come through my headlines and stuff. But when you use words like slavery, it's like it almost feels like an exaggeration, but it's actually not really an exaggeration. And I think every step of the way from drugging her and the narrative being that she's crazy and I'm sure somebody at some point said something like hysterical or borderline, or I'm sure there's some mental health industrial complex garbage terminology. Mm-hmm. And actually, as a side note, I will not identify anything about this client, but there's a client I have right now who is who went into a court situation in a custody battle, representing themselves because they didn't really know anything about how the law works, and they thought, this situation is so absurd, I'm just going to tell the court the truth about what's going on. And what happened was the guy was really rich, and he paid a shit ton of people to give all kinds of weird, skewed kinds of evidence that weren't really evidence. They just kept getting referred back to in the court, and she lost her kids. And it reminds me of this, of how you can, because the conservatorship thing, it's a strictly legalistic. I mean, you couldn't get away with it unless it were sort of legally bound, right? Like that's how it's structurally, formed. So you need this whole legal apparatus around you to say, okay, sounds good. She must be a crazy bitch. We better put her in chains, right? So the only way for you to convince people of that is you need to use, like in our system, this you can't just say she's a crazy bitch, because no judge isn't going to admit that they're actually that misogynistic and say, yeah, she's a crazy bitch. So you have to put it in medical terms to say she's a crazy bitch. You have to say, well, look, she at this concert, she I don't know, she took her shirt off, or you have to point toward things. And then
she didn't have alcohol and drug problems 13 years ago.
Sure. But I mean, it's still to me doesn't
justify. Yeah.
Just the way the story is panned out. If it was just as simple as like she had some pretty severe issues and they needed to, just the put her in rehab thing and rehabilitate her and then give her the kids back and blah blah blah. That'd be whatever. That happens to all kinds of people all the time. That's like a relatively probably a responsible way to go about it. Yep. But the way that it turned out, where the dad, and it just seems like the family and all these lawyers and all these, I'm sure there are doctors inside. I haven't read as extensively into it as you, but I'm sure there's psychiatrists and all kinds of people that were essentially being paid off, probably knowingly, right? And this, like I was saying with my client, the situation was kind of similar, where they got some kind of, I forgot it was a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, but they were saying something, they used terms like enmeshment and with the child and stuff. And like, as I've gotten another person, I'm like, this just this looks like really weaponized mental health language to me. It doesn't actually seem accurate to me. And so that's why it reminds me of that, where you have to get somebody that's assumed to be an authority within a medical context to start using this language to then convince a judge. And that's the only way that this kind of thing can work, right? So to me, it seems like that's where it started. But even before that, I mean, I guess I also think that with child stars, there's we've never really talked about this on the show, but it's so sad to me that there's so many child pop stars who end up having a lot of issues, I think, because they essentially have their childhoods robbed of them, and the parents they'll usually say like, oh, we love our kid and we want them to pursue their dreams. But really at the end of the day, like, you're seeing your kid as a way to, as an investment, right? So as a financial strategy. So you could look, I don't know, there's Justin Bieber, there's all these people, and there's always the drug and alcohol issues. So I think there probably have been some quote unquote mental health issues. But again, if you look at the history, her personal history in the context of her own family, it's like they probably caused whatever problems were there, and then they weaponized that against her to maximize profit, and that's how the whole thing is played out until, I guess, more recently. Now there's this, and one thing I think is kind of weird and cool and not, I guess not too surprising, but I don't know if you saw this, but conservatives jumping on this thing saying "Free Britney." There's like Republican, I forgot if they're Congress people or senators, but they're actually against this. I think it's kind of interesting because maybe they're coming at it from like an individual liberty perspective or something. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, it's probably something that a lot of people could get behind, is to say like, this kind of looks like slavery, kind of looks like you're exploiting your child, but she's no longer a child. She's a grown woman. Sure, she might have some issues, but nothing significant beyond probably millions of ordinary people who also have issues and have, parenting deficits or something. But the issue, it's, I think you're spot on to call it a capitalism issue. She's a, sort of an exploited worker in a really bizarre way that we wouldn't, if we're going to have our 1917 Leninist fantasy talking about the workers revolting, we wouldn't think of Britney Spears as being that way. She's not a factory worker, but all that work she's done to build this career has been basically to make other people rich who are controlling her. So
that's right.
It's nuts. Yeah.
It is all about the money. Her father has appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars from her, and she's plagued wherever she goes. Paparazzi get up to $200,000 for a good photo of her, so they won't give her any peace. But since 2008, she's been under strict exploitation in a conservatorship that they denied her the right, her legal right to challenge. And I think, they used the family. Her father paid off everyone in the family except one sister to help maintain this control. So she was used as a slave. And, they milked her popularity and forced her to perform. She wanted to take time off and have a baby. And they forcibly sterilized her by having her wear an IUD and not get close to anyone. They controlled her every movement. And those people from the law that colluded, like Sam Ingham, are quitting now. Her manager quit. They maybe see that the jig is up. They better quit, because otherwise they will be arrested, because they colluded in her imprisonment. And I think Americans are touched because she's super exploited, and so are they. And because if you have enough money, you can get away with anything. Look at Bill Cosby, who abused 80 women on record, 60 of them who made legal pleas. And he got off on a technicality, having worked on it and paid his lawyers thousands of dollars an hour, and gotten off on a technicality, which another person could never have done, who didn't have those millions to use. So that, you see this woman, Britney Spears, who's now 39, and for the last 13 years has been held a slave. And Americans have been over-medicated. They're also denied their legal rights. They don't know their legal rights. And her legal rights were waived twice by her legal representative, who was well paid. Her father used the capitalist system, and he used her earnings to pay off her jailers. It's really quite remarkable. And I think she did have an alcohol and drug problem. She should have been in a rehab. She should have been protected until she got back on her feet, rather than imprisoned. She didn't even know she had a right to challenge this conservatorship. And if she disobeyed, she was carted off by police, psychiatrists, with a helicopter overhead in a big Hollywood capture scene. And I think people somehow think if you're rich and famous like Britney Spears, you will be spared, but they don't realize that your money is a magnet, just like your labor is a magnet for exploitation to make someone rich, like Bezos and his ilk. if you have anything that makes money, you can be a target, just like the paparazzi target her and hounded her and continue to, because they can get up to 200,000 for a Photoshop shoot. That's what killed Lady Di. Someone sideswiped her, and they haven't proved who it was, but she was trying to escape the paparazzi who gave her no peace because they got money for her photograph. It's so, her personal torment is so intertwined with capitalist exploitation that I think all these people who go to a dead-end job and are treated as if they're just there to make money for someone else feel for her. They feel her enslavement the way they feel their enslavement to their jobs and their medications.
Well, and if I would have, I've been so busy today. If I would have done more prep, I would have said we could even link this to things like mass incarceration and the certain elements of the psychiatry, sort of survivors of psychiatric abuse movements as well, because I think there's a pretty broad parallel. I mean, she's just like this. She almost seems like an anomaly. Probably in that spectacle way, like I was saying, like, oh, you're just sort of some rich, like famous pop star person, but that sort of enslaved, trapped, people are drugging and holding you against your will feeling to just like extract and take from you and to like shut you up, to like just make sure that we can't let you actually tell anyone what's really going on, kind of thing. That's right. Because she probably could have opened up about this. It seems like over the last decade, there were probably all kinds of opportunities where if circumstances were different, she could have just gotten on a microphone, at one of her concerts or something and just said like, look, I'm sorry to break everybody's heart, but here's what's actually going on. And like, and there's somebody back there that's going to force me to pop some pills before I get on the tour bus. And then they're going to have like a straight jacket waiting. There's going to be a guard, and there's somebody there to protect me. And then there's somebody to make sure that I don't jump off the bus, and like, somebody please help me. I'm sure I'm sure like every night on tours, she went through her head. But also she was probably also sedated. Like she
was. And she finally got on TikTok and told, and then went to her audience and told the truth. But it took a lot of empowerment in spite of being drugged and horrendously controlled and exploited to do that. Yeah. Even in her family, there was only one family member who wasn't hired against her. And mass incarceration is the one legal form of slavery under the 13th Amendment. Right. And that's why, so many people are enslaved, working for little or nothing. Even the firefighters who were prisoners, who were released to fight the fires in California, didn't get any credit for their experience that would allow them to get a firefighting job afterwards, even though they risked their lives for free.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad situation. I mean, I wonder about her dad. I mean, I haven't, I read the New Yorker article and a couple other things that you sent me, and I get this from her side. But I'm curious, and how much we obviously don't want to. I don't know, like in a really broad general way, like psychoanalyze the guy and make any hard determinations. But I wonder, like, is it just as simple as like any sort of very exploitive kind of capitalist type of person? Is it just the same psychology, you think, of just, because to me, what's different about it is it's your daughter. So it's one thing if I were a businessman and I said, I'm going to start, I want to own a McDonald's franchise in my city and, keep those wages low, keep the products low and whatever, okay, I'm going to exploit the hell out of people. But to say, well, this is my daughter and I'm going to basically remove as much of her agency as humanly possible to maximize profit from her and to leverage every legalistic and medical, like agency and avenue and prospect I can to just shut her, to make sure she never talks about this with anybody.
That's right.
I mean, your own daughter, it's fascinating. I mean, it's obviously sickening, but I'm like, how, where did that start? Like, does he just have a crazy trauma history? Like, I haven't looked into it. Like, is it that sort of harm people, or hurt people thing? Because it's a perpetrator-esque, like if someone told me like, oh, he actually completely fits the criteria for like psychopathy or something, I'd be like, oh, well, there you go. Like, that's pretty,
well, he
pretty
must.
clear.
But on the other hand, it's a very profitable psychopathy. It really is.
Right.
Britney's mother testified that he always had a toxic relationship with his daughter.
Right.
And, someone testified that when he saw him with her, he said, listen, baby, in a way that was affectionate. Then he got up right up in her face, so his spittle was all over his face, and he screamed, you're fat! You're gaining weight.
Yeah.
Diet. And they controlled what she ate. I think he felt like making money was his object, and anything he could do, anything was worth it. And she was his cash cow. There's a wonderful film by Costa Gavras called Capital. And in it, the man who has ruined every personal relationship he has one remaining person who says, don't do this. You're ruining every relationship you could possibly have. And he says, I don't care. I'm winning. I'm winning. And I think that's what Jamie Spears felt. I'm winning. I'm getting money. And I'm succeeding in this capitalist country. And I think that, look, there are a lot of people who would do that. If it paid him and he got off, I bet Trump would narc out his daughter and anyone else and turn on them.
Well, and that's where I guess, we live in a culture that incentivizes it. Like when you say winning, that was like a hashtag and phrase I think Trump used throughout his campaigning and stuff, right? Like, we're winning, we're winning, right? That it's just, it's a game, it's a competition. And as long as really, I guess it's just money, right? As long as you make money. Right. Also, if you if anybody opposes you or whatever, and you sort of crush them or you get them in trouble, exactly. You're winning, right? So, if they look into you and you silence that, you're winning. If they post a blog thing about you and you get it taken down, you're winning. So, there's a cultural element of it, I think, where I think we're all just sort of given this message, right? That if you make money, get rich, you're at the top, that's the way to go. That there aren't really too many ways that are off limits to do that.
That's right.
Right? If it comes down to like, oh, okay, well, my kid, maybe, because I don't know enough about her history, but maybe she just sort of showed at an early age she really liked singing and dancing or something.
Yes, she did. I do know.
And then, usually with most child, they start pretty early. And so you're sitting there as a dad, you're kind of rubbing your chin. You're like, okay, I think she's pretty good at this, man. I can
make money off of this.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I guess you just get incentivized. It's reinforced, right? So almost sort of just from a behaviorist point of view, just if it keeps making you money,
that's
to keep kind of like taking the money from her and to like quote unquote be her manager, and then that evolves into conservatorship, then it's a pretty good system. I mean, for you, it's a great system. The system is actually congratulating you every step of the way.
They are. You have a lot of prestige and you can buy a lot of influence. You can buy politicians. You can buy your way on things. You can drive a fancy car. You can have all the accoutrements of success. And people are deferential to you because of the money.
Yeah.
That money talks loudly in capitalism. And people who have it can throw their weight around. Trump was recently enraged and fuming at Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court judge, because he said nobody else would have hired him. I'm the one who did it. He owed me. He should have said that I won the election. And Giuliani is the only one who stood by me, and I paid them all. Whoa, yes, you did. You paid them with jobs like Supreme Court justice, and now they owe you because you got the money. And how dare they disappear? It's those same values that really make a corrupt person out of both Jamie Spears, but also torture and imprison and hurt his child and his other children who are paid, all except one, paid to imprison their sister.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty messed up.
It's very messed up. And
another messed up thing.
It's a real capitalist phenomenon. And I think that's why so many people identify with Britney and join the Free Britney movement, particularly women, because her sexuality was so exploited.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that these lawyers and judges could just waive her rights is she's only a woman. Forget it. It would be a little harder with a man. And this happens to the elderly all the time. People put them in conservatorship and steal their assets.
Yeah.
Good capitalists.
This would be, we should actually, if anybody knows who's listening, of anybody that's maybe a little bit on the expert level or scholar level or something on, because I've heard, like I said, with that client that I have, I haven't had a lot of clients on this, but working in the child treatment agency for years, we did see a ton of stuff where there was I always suspected there was some degree of gender bias. I mean, actually in sexual abuse cases, there were some of the most nightmarish things. I almost don't even want to say out loud of the custody arrangements and stuff and the way the evidence would be thrown out. But the way that gender and racial biases show up in the courtroom, I mean, I know Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, is probably one of the, she's probably up there, but I know there's a ton of others. But if anybody can think of anybody we could actually have on, because I think this speaks to that too, in a more general way, because her case is so public and big. But I think for ordinary, I think mothers in particular, like that to me is such a tragic and disgusting kind of process.
Because they're not making the money. They're taking care of the domestic arrangements and the children while the guy is out there making money.
And then, And then, so for example, right, if you need witnesses and all this crap in court to prove stuff, I'm using air quotes here, but to prove things about the people's character or whatever. I mean, most people, I'm not just in the tenant organizing we do over the last year. I've just learned a lot about in the tenant world of, like, you got a landlord versus a tenant. The way that that's stacked against the tenant is just, it's really hard to wrap your head around until you kind of see it happen, and just how eviction cases go and just all kinds of things, or the uphill battle if a tenant just wants to do some kind of like stupid small claims things, get deposit money back, the amount of time they have to take off work, and and nobody, nobody can afford a lawyer, but the landlord always seems to, and there's small mom and pop landlords obviously, but the bigger landlords just have like these teams just always on deck, always waiting, like this, just almost like these like sharks or predators in the water just waiting to go after somebody. They're paid to do that. So there's just these teams of like really high profile, super type A lawyers that are just ready to go after whoever, as long as they get paid to do it. And if you have like a dad that has some money and she's like, that bitch wronged me or whatever, the mom's going to lose the kids. Like it's almost guaranteed, just because she doesn't have the money. That's all it is,
And he does, and he can buy people. And the feeling of Americans is probably as helpless as Britney felt, controlled, medicated, scared, and exploited. And I think that's why so many people identified with her and championed her cause. And I hope that they can also identify with the fact that when she spoke out, she won. And when we speak out, we will win as well.
So what would, to maybe a slightly hopeful angle, what would it look like to have what would an alternative to this look like? Let's say with child stars. I mean, I almost think we shouldn't have child stars on a certain level. Maybe that's taking it too far, but it should have a child. It feels weird to me. It feels weird to me, but okay, but I guess I'm not going to advocate for that necessarily here, but to say like, what would like it? Well, because I was just going to say, well, okay, what if it were a cooperative, right? Like you're an entertainer and there's you and your team. It's a cooperative, and you figure out, well, who gets what based on the, you know, the lawyer does this stuff or the producer does this stuff, and I do, you know, I'm the singer, and the songwriter gets this amount of money or something. That would be pretty cool. But I mean, it'd be really weird for a kid to be part of a co-op. You know, you get some 10-year-old or 12-year, even a 15 or 16-year-old. I feel like it'd be weird for them to, in the same way, you know, because it's if we say that 18 is the legal voting age.
However,
I don't know.
However, Max, if parenting had some balance, if the same checks and balances that are invaluable in government were on parenting, you would have a different story, because now a parent can pimp out their kid.
Yeah.
It's illegal if they're found out, but the people that you're pimping out to won't rat on you. And
Right.
if you are, let's say, a child in most of Europe, let's say France, because I know something about that, child education is universal at 3 years old, and they have both a nurse on staff and a therapist. And if they notice that a child shows problems, then they look into it. If a child is bruised, they notice. If a child is a bully, then they look into the bullying at home. If parents are always taking out a child to have her or him perform, they look into that. But there is some check and balance on the absolute power of parents. And just because somebody gets knocked up doesn't mean they know how to take care of anybody for 24 hours a day. That's crazy. It's a non sequitur, because you're capable of a biological act doesn't make you capable of caring for someone. And if you've had a hard time, you can't take it out on a lot of people, but you sure can take it out on that kid. And there has to be a break. And you can't count on the biological urge to protect your child, because that doesn't even hold up in the animal kingdom. There's a very good film called The Weeping Camel about this baby camel that's born, and the mother has had a terribly hard labor and she won't feed the child. And they have all these inducements to get her to try to feed the child, or that valuable camel baby will die. And they finally it's a Mongolian film, Mongolia in China. They finally get this group that plays these heart-wrenching melodies, and they play that for the mother camel, and she actually weeps, and then she'll nurse her baby. And we have people that we know in the country who raise sheep, and when we came to their house, they have this lamb in a diaper. And I said, well, how come you have her in the house in a diaper? They said, well, her mother had a hard labor, so stepped on her leg and broke it and wouldn't feed her. So we took her in. And it still goes. People have a hard time. They reject a child they have to take care of. And we entrust our children absolutely to whoever got pregnant with no checks and balances. So you'd need a check and balance in the kind of childcare you provide. Also, in these countries who have universal medical care, which is all the other advanced countries, when you're in a child care center, all your pediatric needs are taken care of in that center, and all your examinations are as well, so people can see damage as well as psychological damage. So that would be certainly a way of improving it. Anyhow, I've said my fill.
Yeah. I was going to say right to counsel as a policy reform thing, but I don't know. Yeah. In her case, that would, I mean, for those without a lot of money, that definitely is helpful. But
yeah. Also, she had the right, but it was waived, and they made sure that she never exercised it. Because if people don't know their legal rights, they can't fight for them. Like, you know your right to vote in Texas, but they make sure that you can't. They fool you.
Yeah, I wonder. Geez, that's It does make you wonder. I hadn't thought about the the conservatorship stuff. I haven't thought. There's we're, for listeners, we're, as therapists, we're mandated reporters for certain things like child abuse and elder abuse and such. And I wonder, even with what that looks, I don't know, our system's such a mess. I was going to say, like, is there some way for things to have been flagged earlier? But I guess that's the whole point, is that the guy just had everybody bribed. So I mean, I guess it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter.
That's right.
Right.
And that's what someone can do when they have the money. That's what Epstein did for a long time. Yeah. At any rate, I think we documented why Britney's case has captured so much of America. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I forgot to, let me actually pull this up because we forgot to thank the patrons. I want to say thank you and on all of that.
We really want to thank our Patreon subscribers. We thank everybody for listening and for spreading this podcast around. But the Patreon givers are really specially thanked because they help us so much. This is a capitalist system, and we so appreciate their help, as well as Leo's, who does all the technological stuff that is really time-consuming and difficult.
Yeah. So, and in particular, thank you, First Winter, Sarah Turner, Rebecca Johns, Justin Harper, and Bandila MC Manga. These are patrons that are in like a tier of like, if you pay a certain amount, and we, because we're like evil. But if you pay a certain amount, we say your name on the podcast. So, just kidding with the evil thing. It's just like you have to figure out the tiers. Anyway, that's how it works for the different tiers of patrons. There's a lot of chatter in our Discord server. If anyone wants to join at any tier, there's a lot of conversations about things and about our episode discussions and things like that. So feel free to join if you want to at patreon.com/itsnotjustinyourhead. And if you have any feedback for us, we now have an anonymous form. If for some reason you just want to say something anonymously, if it's like constructive criticism or something, so that should be in the description notes. And if you want to just email us some kind of feedback, we really, really like your feedback.
We sure do.
Email itsnotjustinyourhead@gmail.com.
And we'll always respond to you.
Yeah. Yes, we will. By the way, listeners, if you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
Capitalism Hits Home is a sort of broader overhead view. It explores the way that capitalism shapes our personal lives, our psyches, our relationships, our families, and it looks particularly at the sea change in American personal life as all Americans, but the top 10 or 20% of Americans, have our security and our chance for a future become as precarious as it always was for minorities and families headed by women. It's not just in your head, and Capitalism Hits Home are definitely complementary.
And if listeners would like to check out Capitalism Hits Home, Harriet, where should they go to find it?
Either on YouTube or Democracy at Work or on my own website, harrietfraud.com.